rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to wash the city away. Martha stood on the corner of 4th and Main, her old wool coat soaked through to her bones, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the businessman standing under the awning of the high-end coffee shop. He was screaming into a gold-plated cell phone, cursing at a subordinate while clutching a $100 umbrella. Most people saw a successful, aggressive man. Martha saw something else. Floating just inches above his perfectly groomed hair was a shimmering, translucent digital clock. It was blood red and pulsing. 00:12. The man had 12 seconds left before his timer hit 0. In Martha's world, that timer didn't track life expectancy or bank balances. It tracked the last time a human being had been truly, selflessly loved. When that clock hit 0, something inside the person broke, sometimes permanently. Martha pushed through the crowd, her lungs burning. She was 72 years old, and her legs weren't what they used to be, but she knew the symptoms of a 0. The man's face was turning a sickly shade of gray, his hand trembling so hard he dropped the phone. 10 seconds. Martha reached him just as he began to sway. The crowd moved around him like he was a ghost, nobody wanting to get involved with a man having a meltdown. He looked up, eyes glassy and vacant, ready to give up on a world that only valued his output. Martha didn't say a word. She stepped into his personal space, ignored the expensive suit, and wrapped her thin, frail arms around him in a bone-deep hug. The man stiffened, a growl forming in his throat, but then he felt the warmth of her cheek against his chest. Above his head, the red numbers froze at 0. 0, 0, 1. Then, with a soft chime only Martha could hear, the clock reset, blooming into a soft, golden glow. 365. 0, 0, 0, 0. 1 year of life, restored by a single act of genuine empathy. The man began to sob, the umbrella falling to the wet pavement. Martha patted his back, but as she looked across the street, her heart stopped. Her grandson, Leo, was watching her from the bus stop, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at her face. He was staring 3 inches above her head, his eyes wide with absolute terror. Martha realized with a jolt that the secret she had kept for 60 years was out, and the timer above her own head was spinning backward at a terrifying speed. Leo didn't move as the bus pulled away, splashing muddy water onto his sneakers. He remained frozen, his gaze locked on the space above Martha's head. Martha gently detached herself from the weeping businessman, who was now sitting on a bench, looking like a man who had just woken up from a long, dark nightmare. She hurried toward her grandson, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Leo, honey, we need to go," Martha whispered, reaching for his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Leo didn't take her hand. He stepped back, his voice trembling. "Grandma, what is that? Why is there a clock on you?" Why is it? Why is it moving so fast? Martha looked into a shop window, catching her reflection. She couldn't see her own timer directly, nobody could, but she could see it in the glass. It wasn't golden like the man's. It was a flickering, sickly violet. The numbers were tumbling. 0, 0, 4, 32. 0, 0, 4, 31. She only had 4 minutes of true love left in her reservoir. This was the curse of the gift. To reset someone else's clock, you had to pour a portion of your own accumulated love into them. She had given almost everything she had to that stranger, and now she was running on empty. We have to get to the shelter, Leo. Now, she commanded, her voice cracking with an authority he had never heard before. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the alleyways that led to the city's heart. As they ran, Leo started pointing at people they passed. The lady with the groceries. She has a blue one, the dog walker. His is almost gone, Grandma. It's orange. The boy was seeing the world in its true colors for the first time. He was seeing the invisible poverty of the soul that plagued the city. But as they turned the corner into a dark alley, a black SUV screeched to a halt, blocking their path. 2 men in clinical, gray suits stepped out. They weren't looking at Martha's face either. They were holding specialized tablets that seemed to be scanning the air above her. Subject 01, the taller man said, his voice as cold as the rain. Your reservoir is depleted. You are a liability to the Foundation. Step away from the boy, and we can make this painless. Martha pushed Leo behind her, her violet timer now flashing a warning red. Run, Leo, she hissed. But Leo wasn't looking at the men. He was looking at the timer above the tall man's head, and his face went pale. Grandma, he whimpered. He doesn't have a clock at all. There's nothing there. At part 3, the realization hit Martha like a physical blow. A person without a timer wasn't someone who hadn't been loved. They were something else entirely. They were hollows, individuals who had reached 0 and stayed there so long that their capacity to receive love had withered away. They were the perfect soldiers for the Foundation, a shadowy organization that Martha had spent decades hiding from. They didn't feel empathy, and they didn't care about the clocks. They only cared about controlling the currency of kindness. Leo, don't look at them. Look at me, Martha shouted, shielding his eyes. The taller man stepped forward, reaching into his blazer for a device that looked like a high-tech cattle prod. The boy has the spark, doesn't he? We've been waiting for the lineage to manifest. Hand him over, Martha. You have 3 minutes of sanity left. Don't spend them fighting a losing battle. Martha felt the familiar weight of the currency in her chest. She had one last trick, but it was a suicide mission. If she used the burst, she could reset every clock within a block radius, creating a wave of overwhelming emotion that would distract the hollows, but it would drop her timer to 0 instantly. She would become a hollow herself, or worse, her heart would simply stop. Grandma, no. Leo screamed, sensing her intent. He grabbed her coat, his own small timer, a brilliant, shimmering white, beginning to pulse in sync with hers. I can help. I can give you mine. No, Martha barked. You never give your love to someone who only wants to use it, Leo. That's the first rule. You save it for those who have forgotten what it feels like. She looked at the two men, then at the crowded street just beyond the alley. If she did this, she would save Leo, but she would lose herself. Just as the man in the gray suit lunged, Martha closed her eyes and reached for the very center of her soul. She felt the violet light above her head expand, turning into a blinding supernova. But before she could release the energy, a heavy thud echoed through the alley. A man in a tattered army jacket had dropped from a fire escape, landing squarely on the lead agent's back. It was the homeless man from the park, the one Martha had bought a sandwich for every Tuesday for 3 years. Above his head, his clock was a staggering, vibrant gold. 99, 0, 0, 0, 0. He was a hoarder of kindness. Go, Martha, the man roared, pinning the agent to the ground. Take the boy to the cathedral. They're waiting. But as Martha and Leo turned to run, the second agent pulled a silenced pistol and aimed it not at Martha, but at the golden-clocked man's chest. The thwip of the silenced pistol was barely audible over the thunder, but the effect was devastating. The bullet didn't hit the man in the army jacket. It hit the shimmering golden clock above his head. In Martha's world, you couldn't kill a spirit with lead, but the Foundation had developed void rounds, bullets designed to shatter a person's reservoir. The veteran's golden clock didn't just stop, it exploded into a cloud of gray soot. The man collapsed instantly, his eyes losing all light, his body turning into a slumped, unresponsive shell. He was still breathing, but he was gone. He was a 0. Target's reservoir neutralized, the agent said into his wrist comms. Moving to the primary asset, Martha grabbed Leo's hand and sprinted toward the end of the alley. Her timer was down to 0. 0, 1, 15. The world was beginning to blur. When your clock got this low, colors started to bleed together, and the sounds of the city became a distorted roar. She felt a cold, numbing sensation creeping up her legs. Grandma, you're fading, Leo cried, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. He tried to stop, to hug her, to give her his light, but Martha shoved him forward. They burst out onto the sidewalk, weaving through the evening commuters. To everyone else, they were just an old woman and a kid running in the rain. To Martha, it was a battlefield of ticking bombs. She saw a mother scolding a crying child. The child's clock was dipping into the orange. She saw an elderly woman sitting alone on a bus. Her clock was a faint, flickering purple, just like Martha's. The cathedral, Leo, the blue doors. Martha gasped. Her heart skipped a beat, then another. The red numbers above her head were screaming. 0, 0, 18. They reached the massive oak doors of the St. Jude's Cathedral. Martha slammed her fists against the wood, but her strength was gone. She slumped against the door, sliding down to the stone steps. Leo hammered on the wood, screaming for help, but the doors remained shut. Behind them, the black SUV pulled up to the curb. The agent stepped out, moving with terrifying, slow-motion precision. They knew she was out of time. 10 seconds, Martha, the lead agent said, checking his tablet. 9, 8. Martha looked up at Leo. His white timer was glowing so brightly, it was casting shadows on the church doors. Leo, she whispered, her voice a ghost of itself. The timer isn't a countdown. It's a choice. Remember, kindness is the only currency that doubles when you spend it. 003. The agent reached out to grab Leo. Martha closed her eyes, waiting for the darkness of the zero to take her. But suddenly, the heavy oak doors didn't open, they vanished. The world didn't go dark. Instead, a wave of warmth, smelling of incense and old paper, washed over Martha. She felt a hand, firm and calloused, pull her and Leo inside. The doors slammed shut with a boom that vibrated in her teeth, followed by the sound of heavy iron bolts sliding into place. Martha opened her eyes and gasped. Her timer, which should have hit 0, wasn't red anymore. It was a steady, calm blue. Standing over her was an old man in a janitor's uniform, holding a mop bucket. But above his head wasn't a clock. It was an infinity symbol, glowing with a soft, white light. "You're late, Martha," the man said with a dry chuckle. "I thought the Foundation had picked you off 3 blocks back." "Brother Thomas," Martha breathed, her strength slowly returning. She looked at the blue light of her clock. "How? I was at 0. Thomas nodded toward the interior of the cathedral. Martha looked past the pews and saw dozens of people, homeless youths, disgraced lawyers, lonely teachers, all sitting in silence. And above every single one of them, their timers were linked by thin, golden threads of light, all flowing toward a central point on the altar. They were the web. By sharing their love in a collective circuit, no one ever hit 0. "This is the vault," Thomas explained, looking at Leo. "And I see the boy has the crown spark. He's not just a seer, Martha. He's a generator." Leo was staring at the golden threads in awe. "They're all helping each other. It's the only way to survive the hollows," Thomas said, his expression turning grim. "But the vault is being squeezed. The Foundation is buying up the land around us. They're building apathy towers, structures designed to dampen the signal of kindness. If we can't break the siege, the web will snap." Suddenly, the stained glass windows of the cathedral rattled. A deep, low-frequency hum began to vibrate through the floorboards. On the altar, the golden threads began to flicker and turn gray. The people in the pews groaned, clutching their chests as their timers began to drain at an unnatural speed. "They're here," Thomas whispered, dropping his mop. They brought a nullifier. Outside, a massive crane was lowering a sleek, metallic monolith onto the roof of the building next door. As it touched down, Martha's timer plummeted from blue back to a flashing red in seconds. "Martha," Leo screamed. "The threads are breaking." Martha looked at the altar. The golden light was dying. If the web broke, 50 souls in this room would hit zero at the exact same moment. She looked at her grandson, then at the infinity symbol above Thomas's head, which was beginning to dim. "We have to go to the roof," Martha said, her eyes flashing with a fire Leo had never seen. "Leo, you're not just going to watch. You're going to show them what." The toxic green glow at the cathedral doors wasn't fire. It was a despair field, a specialized frequency designed by the Foundation to accelerate the timers of anyone nearby. Martha felt the weight of 1,000 sorrows pressing down on her shoulders. Memories of her husband's funeral, the lonely years of raising David, and the crushing poverty of her youth flooded her mind. Her timer, already struggling, flickered dangerously. "Don't let the green light touch your thoughts, Leo," Martha shouted over the low-frequency hum of the nullifier. "Think of the day we went to the coast. Think of the ice cream that melted on your shoes." Leo squeezed his eyes shut, his small hands balled into fists. Above his head, his brilliant white timer pulsed, fighting back the green haze. He was a generator, a rare soul capable of creating the currency of kindness out of thin air rather than just recycling what he had received. The Foundation didn't just want to kill him. They wanted to hook him up to their machines and harvest him until he was a husk. Brother Thomas grabbed a heavy iron candle holder. "The spiral stairs now. I'll hold the vestibule as long as my infinity remains. Once they cross the threshold, the web is gone." Martha grabbed Leo's hand and lunged for the narrow stone staircase. Every step felt like wading through deep mud. The nullifier on the adjacent building was working perfectly, draining the collective pool of the cathedral's occupants. As they spiraled upward, Martha looked down over the railing. The people in the pews were collapsing, their golden threads snapping like brittle glass. Each snap sounded like a heartbeat stopping. They reached the belfry, the wind howling through the open arches. Across the narrow alley, on the roof of a luxury apartment complex, the metallic monolith glowed with an aggressive, pulsing light. 3 agents in tactical gear stood around it, their tablets tracking the energy drain. One of them looked up and saw Martha. He didn't reach for a gun, he reached for a remote. "Grandma, look." Leo pointed to the street below. A second black SUV had arrived, and men were unloading canisters of the green gas. "They're going to put everyone to sleep. We have to stop that machine." "I can't reach it, Leo," Martha gasped, her lungs burning from the climb. Her timer was at 0:45. "It's too far. The gap between the buildings is 20 feet. You don't have to reach it." A voice crackled from a small radio on the floor. It was Thomas. "Leo has to throw it." "Throw what?" Martha asked. The spark, Thomas's voice was fading as the green gas breached the main hall. "Leo, give your grandmother everything you have. If she can bridge the gap with your light, she can short-circuit the nullifier. But Martha, if you miss, you both hit zero instantly. Martha looked at the 20-foot drop, then at her grandson. The agents were now aiming a long-range void cannon at the belfry. They had 3 seconds before the first shot. The void cannon fired a pulse of pure vacuum. It didn't explode, it erased. A massive chunk of the belfry's stone pillar simply vanished into dust, leaving the roof tilting precariously. Martha stumbled, nearly sliding off the edge into the rain-slicked abyss. "Leo, give me your hand," she screamed. Leo didn't hesitate. He grabbed his grandmother's weathered hand. The moment their skin touched, Martha felt a surge of energy so violent it nearly knocked her unconscious. It wasn't just heat. It was a flood of pure, unadulterated joy. She saw Leo's first steps. She felt the warmth of his laughter. She saw every moment of love he had ever felt for her. His white timer began to pour into her, turning her violet clock into a blinding, celestial silver. The agents on the opposite roof shielded their eyes. "He's discharging," one yelled. "Neutralize the old woman." Martha felt her body becoming light, almost weightless. The currency was so thick in her veins that she could see the air itself, a grid of invisible connections. She saw the agents, not as men, but as black holes in the grid, and she saw the nullifier as a parasite, a tick feeding on the city's heart. "Now, Grandma," Leo cried, his face pale as his reservoir emptied into her. Martha didn't throw a punch or a stone. She threw a prayer. She channeled every ounce of the crown's spark into a single, focused beam of empathy. She didn't want to destroy the agents. She wanted to force them to feel. The silver light bridged the 20-foot gap, hitting the nullifier dead center. The machine groaned, its internal cooling systems failing as it was flooded with a frequency it wasn't built to handle. The frequency of a grandmother's unconditional love. The monolith exploded in a shower of sparks and golden glass. The shockwave knocked the agents flat and sent a ripple of restorative energy back across the alley into the cathedral. Below, the green gas dissipated, replaced by a sudden, sweet scent of jasmine. "We did it," Leo cheered, but his voice was weak. He slumped against the stone wall, his white timer now a faint, translucent flicker. He had given too much. Martha rushed to him, but as she reached out, a red dot appeared on Leo's chest. She looked across the roof. The lead agent had survived the blast. He was kneeling, his face bruised and bleeding, aiming a high-precision sniper rifle with a void round chambered. His eyes were wide with a terrifying, hollow rage. "You broke the asset," the agent hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "If the Foundation can't have the generator, no one will." Time slowed to a crawl. Martha knew she couldn't outrun a bullet. She couldn't even stand up fast enough to shield Leo. But in that split second, she remembered the lesson Brother Thomas had whispered. The currency of kindness isn't just a gift, it's a shield. She didn't move her body, she moved her will. She projected her remaining silver light into a thin, shimmering barrier in front of Leo. The sniper rifle barked. The void round hit the barrier. It didn't shatter the light, it was absorbed by it. The bullet slowed down, turning from a deadly projectile into a harmless lump of lead that fell to the stone floor with a dull clink. The agent stared in disbelief. He tried to bolt another round, but he stopped. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. The silver light Martha had thrown earlier was finally taking effect. For the first time in 20 years, the Hollow was starting to feel the weight of his sins. He dropped the rifle, clutching his head, screaming as 2 decades of suppressed guilt came rushing back in a single wave. "Grandma," Leo whispered, his eyes fluttering. "Is it over?" "Almost, honey," Martha said, her own timer now stabilizing at a healthy blue. She looked down into the cathedral courtyard. The other agents were retreating, their equipment malfunctioning as the web inside the church surged with renewed power. But as she prepared to carry Leo down, a shadow fell over the belfry. A helicopter, sleek and silent, rose from the darkness below the roofline. It wasn't a foundation craft. It was white, marked with a simple blue feather. The side door slid open, revealing a woman in a sharp navy suit. She didn't have a timer. She had an infinity symbol, just like Thomas, but hers was a deep, burning gold. "Martha Vance," the woman called out over the roar of the rotors. "I am Sarah, director of the sanctuary. Brother Thomas called for an extraction. Your grandson is in critical condition." Martha stepped back, pulling Leo closer. "How do I know you're not with them? How do I know you won't harvest him too?" Sarah stepped onto the belfry ledge, her presence radiating a calm that was almost intoxicating. "Look at the people in the cathedral, Martha. They are waking up. We don't harvest the light, we protect the source. But the Foundation has more nullifiers. They have a fleet. Seattle is no longer safe for a generator of his caliber." Martha looked at Leo's flickering timer. He was dying. The crown spark had drained his physical vitality. He needed a reservoir bigger than hers to survive the night. "Where are you taking us?" Martha asked. "To the place where the timers don't exist," Sarah replied. "To the origin of the currency." As Martha stepped toward the helicopter, she glanced back at the city. Thousands of red and orange timers flickered in the dark, a sea of lonely people. She realized then that leaving meant turning her back on a city that desperately needed her. But staying meant certain death for the only family she had left. The helicopter ride was a blur of neon city lights and the rhythmic thumping of the blades. Sarah sat across from them, her eyes fixed on Leo. She held a small crystal vial filled with a glowing liquid. "Drink this, Leo," Sarah commanded gently. "It's distilled empathy. It won't refill your reservoir, but it will stabilize your heart." Leo took a sip, and his color immediately began to return. Martha watched him, her mind racing. "You said we're going to the origin. Where is that?" It's an island in the North Pacific, Sarah said. The Foundation calls it Sector 0. We call it Eden's Hearth. It's the only place on Earth where the collective consciousness is strong enough to keep the hollows at bay. But Martha, there is something you need to know about your husband. Martha froze. Henry, he died in a car accident 10 years ago. What does he have to do with this? Sarah sighed, looking out the window. Henry didn't die in an accident. He was the first generator of this century. He sacrificed his entire reservoir to stop the Foundation from launching a global nullifier satellite. He hit 0 on purpose to save the world. He didn't die. He became the first hollow with a soul. He's been the one feeding us intel from inside the Foundation for a decade. The floor seemed to drop out from under Martha. Henry, alive, a hollow with a soul. It was impossible. A 0 was a shell, a walking ghost. If he's a hollow, he doesn't remember me, Martha whispered, her heart breaking all over again. He remembers everything, Sarah said. That's why he's in pain every single second. Love is poison to a hollow, yet he keeps seeking it to help us. But now, they've found him out. They're using him as a lure to bring Leo to Sector 0. Suddenly, the helicopter lurched violently. An alarm began to blare in the cockpit. We've been painted by a surface-to-air missile, the pilot shouted. Impact in 5 seconds. Sarah yelled, diving over Martha and Leo to shield them. Martha looked out the window and saw a trail of white smoke screaming toward them through the clouds. She reached out, trying to manifest the silver shield again, but she was empty. She had nothing left to give. The missile struck the tail rotor. The helicopter spun into a terrifying death spiral, plunging toward the black, churning waters of the Pacific Ocean below. The impact with the water felt like hitting concrete. The cabin of the helicopter shattered, and freezing salt water, the interior of the manta ray submersible, was silent, save for the rhythmic pulse of its bioluminescent walls. Sarah collapsed against the hull, pressing a hand to her bleeding temple. Martha, dripping with salt water and shivering, rushed to the viewport. The cargo ship, the USNS Malice, was disappearing into a wall of artificial fog. That wasn't just a man in a cardigan, Sarah, Martha whispered, her voice trembling. That was Henry. I know the way he stands. I know the way he tilts his head. But those eyes, those weren't the eyes of the man I loved. I told you, Martha, Sarah gasped, pulling a medical kit from a wall panel. The Foundation didn't just turn him into a hollow. They turned him into the architect. Because he was a generator who hit 0 voluntarily, his void is more powerful than any natural-born hollow. He doesn't just lack love, he consumes it. He is the ultimate nullifier. Martha felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. And now he has Leo, his own grandson. He doesn't see a grandson, Sarah said, injecting herself with a shimmering blue serum. He sees a battery. If Henry can merge his void with Leo's crown spark, he can create a global 0, a frequency that will wipe every timer on Earth simultaneously. No more kindness, no more empathy. just a world of hollows, easy to lead, easy to control. The submersible accelerated, diving deep beneath the thermal layers of the Pacific. Martha watched the depth gauge spin. They were going down to where the light couldn't reach, chasing a ghost and a child. "How do we stop him?" Martha asked, her jaw set. "If I'm empty and Leo is a prisoner, what do we have left to fight with?" Sarah looked up, her golden infinity symbol flickering. "We have the currency of the ancestors. In the deepest vault of Eden's hearth, there is a reservoir of love left behind by those who passed with their clocks still full. It's a dangerous, raw energy. If you can channel it, you might be able to wake Henry up. But if you fail, the energy will burn your soul to a crisp." Suddenly, the submersible jolted. The sonar screen lit up with dozens of red blips. "They found us," Sarah hissed. "Foundation depth charges. They're trying to crush us before we reach the trench." The first depth charge exploded 100 yards to their port side. The shockwave tossed Martha across the cabin, her head striking a padded console. The bioluminescent walls flickered from calm blue to an angry, warning orange. "Brace yourself," Sarah yelled, her hands flying over the organic controls. "They're using apathy pulses in the charges. It's draining the sub's power." The manta ray sub groaned under the pressure. Martha crawled back to the viewport. Above them, through the dark water, she could see the silhouettes of dozens of unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, dropping glowing canisters. Every time one exploded, Martha felt a wave of profound hopelessness wash over her. It was as if the ocean itself was telling her to give up, to let the water take her, to stop fighting for a boy she couldn't save. "My timer." Martha looked at her wrist. Her clock was spinning backward again, not from spending love, but from the environmental drain of the pulses. 05:0:04:30. They're trying to zero us before we hit the gate. Sarah shouted, "Martha, I need you to focus on the boy. Don't let the pulse take your memories of him." Martha squeezed her eyes shut. She pictured Leo's face the day he found a wounded bird in the garden. He had sat with it for 6 hours, just humming softly until it flew away. She pictured the way he always saved the last bite of his favorite chocolate for her. As she held onto those memories, a faint silver light began to leak from her fingertips. She wasn't a generator, but she was a carrier. She was the vessel that had held the love of 2 generations of men. "I see the gate," Sarah cried. Ahead of them, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, was a massive, shimmering rift in the seafloor. It looked like a liquid diamond. It was the entrance to Eden's hearth, a pocket of compressed space-time where the currency was manufactured. But standing between them and the rift was a Foundation Goliath sub, a mountain of black steel and harpoon launchers. And standing on its outer hull, encased in a pressurized suit, but with his face visible through a reinforced visor, was Henry. He raised a hand, and the water around the manta ray sub began to freeze, not into ice, but into a dark, crystalline sludge of pure despair. The manta ray sub came to a grinding halt, trapped in the crystalline sludge. The engines screamed in protest, but they were being anchored by Henry's void. "He's pulling our light into himself," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "He's using us to fuel his own descent." Martha stood up and walked to the front of the sub, pressing her palms against the reinforced glass. Just 3 feet away, separated by the hull and the dark water, was her husband. His eyes were like twin eclipses, sucking in the bioluminescence of the sub. "Henry," she mouthed, though she knew he couldn't hear her. "Please, it's me." Henry's head tilted. For a fraction of a second, the dark pits of his eyes flickered. A tiny spark of violet appeared, then was instantly smothered by the blackness. He raised his other hand, and a massive harpoon, tipped with a Void Shatter warhead, locked onto the sub's cockpit. "He's going to breach us," Sarah said, reaching for a self-destruct trigger. "If he gets the sub, he gets the coordinates to the hearth. I have to end this now." "Wait," Martha screamed. "Give me the ancestors' reservoir. Now." "Martha, you're too weak. It will kill you." "I'm already dying, Sarah. Look at my clock." Martha's timer was at 0, 0, 0, 15. Sarah hesitated, then reached into the floor and pulled out a heavy, lead-lined cylinder. She cracked the seal, and a light so bright it was painful to look at erupted into the cabin. It sounded like a choir of 1,000 voices, all singing in perfect harmony. It was the collective, true love of centuries of grandmothers, mothers, and protectors. Martha didn't wait. She grabbed the light with her bare hands. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined. It felt like her veins were being filled with liquid gold. Her skin began to glow, her wrinkles smoothing out as the raw energy of the ancestors flowed through her. "Henry," she roared, her voice projecting through the hull via the energy. She pushed her hands forward. The silver gold light erupted from the sub, shattering the crystalline sludge like glass. The shockwave hit the Goliath sub, sending it reeling. But the light didn't stop there. It wrapped around Henry, forming a bridge of pure, radiant warmth. For a moment, the bottom of the ocean was as bright as noon on a summer day. Martha felt herself being pulled out of her body, her consciousness traveling across the golden bridge and into Henry's mind. She expected to find a fortress of hate. Instead, she found a desert. Henry was there, standing in the middle of a vast, gray wasteland. He was holding a small, flickering candle, the last remnant of his soul. Around him, towering shadows of the foundation's brainwashing circled like vultures. "Martha," his voice was a dry rasp. "Is that you? Or is this another hallucination?" "It's me, Henry," she said, stepping into his mental wasteland. She was draped in the golden light of the ancestors. "I'm here to take you home and to get our grandson, Leo." Henry's shadow self shuddered. "They have him in the centrifuge. They're spinning his spark, trying to turn it into a weapon. I couldn't stop them, Martha. I'm a 0. I have nothing left to give. You have me, she said, reaching out her hand. But as their hands were about to touch, a massive black spike erupted from the ground between them. The architect, the persona the foundation had forced upon Henry, rose up like a skyscraper. "The currency is spent," the architect roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of Henry's mind. "The boy is the new world order. The grandmother is obsolete." Back in the sub, Martha's body began to convulse. The golden light was turning black at the edges. Sarah tried to pull her away, but she was locked in the psychic battle. "Martha, let go," Sarah screamed. "The void is back feeding into the reservoir. You're polluting the hearth." Martha ignored her. She looked at the architect, and then at the shivering version of Henry. She realized she couldn't win by force. She had to do the one thing a hollow could never understand. She took the golden light of the ancestors, and instead of using it to attack, she turned it inward. She began to destroy her own timer. Sarah watched in horror as Martha's violet clock began to crack. "Martha, no. If you break your own timer, you'll never be able to receive love again. You'll be a hollow forever." Martha didn't care. By breaking her own clock, she was releasing the locked currency, the love she had been saving for her own survival. It was a forbidden move known as the final bequest. In the mental wasteland, the golden light exploded. It didn't hit the architect, it flooded the wasteland itself, turning the gray sand into lush green grass. The black spike crumbled. Henry's candle grew into a bonfire. Henry gasped, his eyes suddenly clearing. The black pits vanished, replaced by the warm, chocolate brown eyes Martha had fallen in love with 50 years ago. "Martha," he whispered, his physical body on the Goliath sub slumping. The link snapped. Martha was slammed back into her seat in the manta ray sub. Her wrist was bare. No numbers, no glow. She was a zero. She felt nothing. No pain, no joy, just a flat, gray emptiness. "You did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You broke his conditioning. But Martha, the cost." Martha looked out the viewport. The Goliath sub was in chaos. Henry had turned his void cannon on the Foundation's own UUVs, blasting them out of the water. He was fighting back. But the USNS Malice, the cargo ship above, was already accelerating. "They're heading for the volcanic vents," Sarah said, checking her monitors. "They're going to drop Leo into the hearth's core. If his spark hits the core while he's under their control, the entire planet's empathy field will invert." Martha stood up. She felt cold. She felt hollow. But she remembered the mission. "Then we follow them. We don't need a timer to save a child." "Wait," Sarah pointed to the sonar. "Something is coming out of the rift. Something big." A massive, golden gate began to rise from the sea floor, and from within it, the sight of Chloe on the screen felt like a physical infection. This was the woman who had spent years slowly alienating Martha's son, David, from the family. The woman who had insisted on the expensive nursing home and had smirked when Martha was forced to sell her wedding ring to pay for Leo's medical bills. Martha, now a 0, didn't feel the heat of rage, but she felt the cold, hard logic of the situation. Chloe isn't a high priestess because she's a believer, Sarah, Martha said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. She's a high priestess because she is the most efficient eater the Foundation has ever found. She doesn't just lack empathy, she finds it delicious. She's been feeding on Leo since the day he was born. On the screen, Chloe leaned down and stroked Leo's hair. The boy winced, his green-tinted timer spiking. "Don't be so dramatic, Leo," Chloe cooed. "The world is a cold place. I'm just preparing you for it. Once we drop you into the core, you won't have to feel anything ever again. No more clocks, no more guilt. Just the peace of the void. We're 10 minutes from the volcanic vents," Sarah said, her hands trembling as she pushed the mantisub to its absolute limit. The Sentinels are engaging the Foundation's surface fleet, but the malice is shielded by a sorrow plate. The spirits can't get through it. Only a living person can breach that hull. Behind them, the Goliath sub, commanded by the now awakened Henry, surged forward. "Martha," Henry's voice came through the comms, echoing with the static of his own dying reservoir. "I'm going to ram the malice. I'll create a breach in the stern. You and Sarah have to get to the centrifuge. Save the boy, Martha. Even if I can't be the man you remember, let me be the man who ends this." "Henry, no," Sarah shouted. "The malice is carrying void mines. If you ram them, the explosion will wipe out every soul within 5 miles. Martha looked at the screen, at her grandson's terrified eyes. She looked at her own pale, timerless reflection. "Do it, Henry," she whispered. "I'll be waiting at the breach." The Goliath sub accelerated, its engines screaming a dirge of defiance. It hit the malice like a falling star, a blinding flash of white and black light erupting at the waterline of the massive cargo ship. The explosion rocked the ocean, sending a skyscraper-sized plume of steam into the night sky. The malice groaned, tilting precariously to its port side as the Goliath sub became a permanent part of its hull. The mantisub docked into the jagged hole created by the impact. Martha stepped out into the smoke-filled corridor of the cargo ship. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burnt plastic. Beside her, Sarah gripped a pulse pistol, her golden infinity symbol lighting the way through the haze. "This way," Sarah shouted, pointing toward a heavy blast door. They stepped over the unconscious bodies of Foundation guards, whose timers had been shattered by the proximity of the blast. Martha moved with a terrifying, mechanical efficiency. Being a 0 meant she wasn't slowed down by fear or the overwhelming grief of seeing Henry's sub crumpled like tin. She was a machine with one directive: retrieve the asset. They reached the centrifuge chamber. It was a cathedral of cold steel, dominated by a massive, spinning ring in the center. Leo was strapped into a chair in the middle of the ring, his green timer now so bright it was blinding. Chloe stood on a raised platform, holding a control tablet. You're too late, Martha, Chloe said, not even looking up. The centrifuge has reached terminal velocity. The spark is no longer Leo's. It's the Foundation's property now. Let him go, Chloe, Martha said, her voice echoing in the hollow chamber. This isn't about power for you. It's just about being the only one who doesn't feel the sting of being unloved. I know David left you. I know you're empty. Chloe's head snapped up, her face contorting into a mask of pure hatred. David didn't leave me. I discarded him. He was weak, just like you. He actually cared about people. It was disgusting. She tapped a final command on the tablet. The spinning ring began to descend toward a hole in the floor that led directly to the ocean's volcanic core. Goodbye, Leo. Give my regards to the ancestors. Suddenly, the floor beneath Chloe's platform erupted. Henry, his suit torn and his face covered in blood, pulled himself out of the wreckage of the Goliath's prow. He didn't go for Chloe. He lunged for the centrifuge's manual override. Part 18. Henry, Chloe screamed, drawing a sleek, silver sidearm. She fired 3 times. The void rounds hit Henry in the shoulder and chest, but he didn't stop. As a man who had already hit 0 and come back, the death of a reservoir didn't affect him the same way. He was powered by sheer, stubborn memory. He slammed his fist into the override lever, grinding the spinning ring to a halt, just inches above the fiery maw of the core. Martha rushed across the catwalk, her boots clanging on the metal. She reached the chair and began tearing at Leo's restraints. Grandma, Leo whispered, his eyes rolling back in his head. I can't feel my heart. It's cold. I've got you, Leo. I've got you. Martha freed his arms, but as she tried to lift him, she felt a sharp, stinging pain in her back. She turned to see Chloe standing there, a wicked, jagged blade in her hand, a siphon blade designed to drain the very last drop of life from a subject. If I can't have the world, Martha, I'll have your silence, Chloe hissed. But Chloe stopped. She looked down at the blade, then at Martha. The blade wasn't glowing. It wasn't drawing anything out. What are you? Chloe stammered, backing away. There's nothing in you. No love, no hate, you're a ghost. I'm a grandma, Martha said. And for the first time since hitting 0, a flicker of something moved in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet. It was justice. Martha grabbed Chloe's wrist with a strength that defied her age. She twisted, the blade clattering to the floor. You spent your life trying to steal what we give away for free. Behind them, Sarah was shouting. The ship is sinking. The core is destabilizing. We have to move. Henry was slumped over the controls, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Take the boy, he wheezed. The mantisub. Get to the surface. I'll hold the doors. I'm not leaving you again, Henry. Martha shouted, grabbing Leo and slinging his arm over her shoulder. You have to. Henry looked at her, and for a moment, the old Henry was back, the man who used to bring her wildflowers from the highway shoulder. Martha, look at the boy's clock. It's turning black. If he stays near the core, he'll become the first negative generator. He'll infect the whole world from the bottom up. It was true. The green light on Leo's timer was being replaced by a swirling, oily blackness. The Foundation's experiments had corrupted his gift. Martha looked from her husband to her grandson. The choice was impossible, but as she hesitated, Chloe lunged for the siphon blade again. If he's going to be a negative, then he's still mine. Chloe shrieked. A sudden, deafening crack echoed through the chamber. The hull of the malice finally gave way under the pressure. A wall of freezing seawater burst into the room, sweeping Chloe away into the darkness of the lower decks. Sarah grabbed Martha's arm, pulling her toward the escape hatch. Henry, now, come on. Henry stood up, but his legs gave out. He looked at the water rushing in, and then at the manual lever. If he let go, the centrifuge would drop into the core, and the explosion would ensure no one survived. He had to hold it manually to keep the stabilizers active until they were clear. Go, Henry whispered, his eyes locked on Martha's. I'll see you in the place where the timers don't exist. Martha felt a scream build in her throat, but she had no currency to voice it. She allowed Sarah to drag her and Leo into the mantisub. As the hatch hissed shut, she saw Henry, standing tall amidst the rushing water, holding the lever with both hands, a small, golden light beginning to glow in the center of his chest. He was performing his final burst. The mantisub ejected, shooting toward the surface just as the USNS Malice was swallowed by a massive underwater implosion. The mantisub breached the surface of the Pacific, tossing in the violent wake of the sinking ship. Rain lashed the viewport. Around them, the Foundation's fleet was in full retreat, hounded by the glowing white sentinels who were now fading back into the mist. Inside the sub, the silence was deafening. Martha sat on the floor, cradling Leo. The boy was shivering, his timer still pulsing with that sickly, oily blackness. We lost him, Martha said, her voice a flat, dead thing. Henry is gone. And Leo, look at him, Sarah. We didn't save him. We just changed the color of his cage. Sarah knelt beside them, checking Leo's pulse. The corruption is deep, Martha. He's been forced to generate despair for too long. His soul has forgotten the frequency of kindness. Unless we can find a way to reset him, he'll wake up as the most dangerous entity on the planet. How do we reset a generator? Martha asked. You can't, Sarah said, her voice heavy with grief. Only another generator can do that. And Henry was the last one. Martha looked at her own empty wrist. Then she looked at the ancestor's reservoir cylinder, which the air inside the dead mantisub grew frigid as Leo's corrupted energy continued to bleed into the cabin. His small face was twisted in an expression of agonizing hunger, not for food, but for the light he had been forced to surrender. Sarah lay slumped against the control panel, paralyzed by the apathy wave emanating from the boy. Martha, being a zero, was the only one who could still move. because she had no reservoir left to drain. The hurt had nothing to latch onto. She stood up, her joints popping, and looked at her grandson. He was no longer the boy who loved birds. He was a black hole in a cardigan. "Leo, look at me," Martha commanded. Her voice was thin, but steady. "I see you, Grandma," Leo rasped, his eyes glowing with that radioactive green. "I see a hollow shell. I see a woman who gave everything and got nothing in return. Why do you still fight? There is no clock above your head. You don't exist anymore." He raised a hand, and a shard of black glass, solidified despair, formed in the air. He wasn't just a seer now, he was a creator of the void. The high command is right. If the world is built on a currency that can be stolen, then the currency shouldn't exist. I'm going to balance the books. I'm going to make everyone a zero. Across the water, the Foundation's floating fortress, a monstrosity of chrome and jagged antennas, drew closer. A bridge of solid light extended from the fortress toward their drifting sub. They didn't even need to fire a shot. They were just waiting for the negative generator to walk across. Martha looked at the black shard aimed at her heart. She realized that Leo's corruption was like a virus. It needed a host to feed on. It was looking for a reaction, for fear, for the hurt. "You're right, Leo," Martha said softly, stepping toward the black shard until the point touched her chest. "I am a zero. I have no light left. I have no love left to give you. I am completely, utterly empty." Leo hesitated, the green glow in his eyes flickering. "Then get out of my way." "No," Martha said, a ghostly smile touching her lips. "Because you forgot the most important rule of being a grandma. We don't just give you what we have. We give you what we are." Martha grabbed the black shard with both hands. Usually, touching a void construct would shatter a person's mind. But Martha was already at the bottom. She began to pull. She wasn't trying to break the shard. She was trying to absorb it. "What are you doing?" Leo screamed, his voice cracking. "It will destroy you. There's nowhere for it to go." "I am a zero, Leo," Martha gasped, her skin turning a bruised, ashen gray as the blackness flowed into her. A zero is a vacuum, and a vacuum can hold an infinite amount of nothing. She was performing a reverse bequest. Instead of giving love, she was taking the boy's pain into herself, using her empty soul as a containment vessel. The oily blackness moved up her arms, mapping her veins in dark ink. Her heart, which had been silent, began to beat with a heavy, rhythmic thud, each pulse a memory of the hurt Leo had endured. In the distance, the high command realized what was happening. "Intercept." A voice boomed from the fortress. "The grandmother is neutralizing the asset. Fire the null beams." The fortress lit up, firing twin beams of red energy at the sub. The impact flipped the vessel, throwing Sarah and the equipment into the corner. But Martha didn't let go of Leo. She held him tight, her body acting as a lightning rod for the boy's corruption and the Foundation's hate. "Grandma, stop. You'll die," Leo cried, his green eyes finally beginning to fade back to brown. I've lived long enough to know, Martha choked out, that the only thing that can kill a grandma is seeing her baby in pain. With a final, desperate heave, Martha pulled the last of the blackness out of Leo's chest and into her own. The boy collapsed, his white timer reappearing faint, but pure. Martha stood alone in the center of the sub, her body glowing with a terrifying, dark luminescence. She was no longer a zero. She was something the world had never seen, a negative zero. She was a bomb of pure, concentrated sorrow, and she knew exactly where she needed to detonate. Martha turned to Sarah, who was struggling to sit up. Sarah, get the sub's auxiliary power online. Get Leo to the hearth. Now. Martha, look at you, Sarah whispered, her face pale with horror. You're carrying the collective despair of the Foundation's entire history. If you go out there, you'll never come back. There's no infinity for what you've become. I know, Martha said. She looked at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. She didn't have a timer, so she couldn't give him love, but she gave him her last breath. Martha stepped out of the hatch and onto the rain-slicked hull of the sub. The light bridge from the Foundation fortress was right there. She stepped onto it. The Foundation guards at the other end of the bridge raised their void rifles, but they didn't fire. They couldn't. As Martha walked toward them, the sheer weight of the sorrow she carried made them drop to their knees. Their tablets cracked. Their hollow conditioning shattered. They began to weep for mothers they hadn't seen in decades, for friends they had betrayed, for the lives they had wasted. Martha entered the high command fortress like a shadow passing through a dream. Every floor she climbed, the machines died. The apathy towers crumbled. The currency they had stolen and stored in massive vats began to boil and turn to steam. She reached the throne room at the top. Chloe was there, backed into a corner, clutching a suitcase full of distilled empathy vials. Stay away from me, Chloe shrieked. I'll use it. I'll drink it all. You can't eat this, Chloe, Martha said, her voice sounding like the wind through a graveyard. This isn't for you. Martha opened her arms. The blackness inside her reached its critical mass. She saw the hearth in the distance, the golden rift in the ocean, and she felt a connection. She wasn't a generator, but she was a bridge. Part 24. Henry, Martha whispered. I hope you're watching. Martha released the grandma's burden. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of truth. Every ounce of despair, loneliness, and pain she had taken from Leo, and the world was released all at once. But it was filtered through the one thing the Foundation could never account for, Martha's memory of what it felt like to be loved. The blackness turned into a silver mist that expanded at the speed of light. It swept through the fortress, through the city of Seattle, and across the Pacific. It didn't kill the hollows. It gave them back their hearts. But a heart that hasn't felt anything for 20 years hurts when it starts beating again. It was a global waking up. The high command fortress began to disintegrate. the metal turning back into the raw elements of the earth. Chloe, caught in the center of the mist, screamed as her own timer appeared above her head, starting at 0, 0, 0, 1. She was forced to feel the weight of every person she had ever hurt. As the fortress collapsed into the sea, Martha felt herself falling. The silver mist was taking her apart, molecule by molecule. She saw the ocean rushing up to meet her, but she wasn't afraid. She saw a golden light rising from the depths, not a machine, not a spirit, but a hand. It was Henry. He wasn't a hollow. He wasn't a generator. He was just Henry. They met in the air. 2 zeros who had given everything for a world that would never know their names. As they touched, their combined nothingness created a perfect, silent vacuum. And in that vacuum, a new timer appeared. It wasn't a clock. It wasn't an infinity symbol. It was a simple, golden heart that didn't have any numbers at all. "Is it over?" Martha asked as they sank into the warm, golden light of the hearth. "No," Henry smiled. "It's just starting. Look." 5 years later, the world looked much the same to the naked eye, but the atmosphere had changed. The currency was no longer a secret kept by a few. It was the foundation of the new global economy. People didn't trade in gold or data. They traded in seconds of sincerity. Leo, now 12 years old, stood in the center of a bustling community garden in Seattle. Above his head, his white timer had evolved. It was now a beacon, glowing with a light that reached for blocks, keeping everyone's clocks in the green just by his presence. He wasn't a battery anymore. He was a teacher. Sarah stood beside him, her golden infinity symbol now shared by many others. "The foundation is gone, Leo, but the hollows are still out there. They're just people now, people who need to learn how to be loved again." Leo nodded, looking at a woman sitting on a nearby bench. It was Chloe. She was thin, her hair gray, and she spent her days weeding the garden for no pay. Her timer was small, only a few hours, but it was steady. She was learning that the only way to keep her clock from hitting 0 was to pull the weeds from someone else's path. Leo walked over to a small marble statue in the center of the garden. It depicted an old woman holding a child's hand. There were no names on it, just a single inscription: "The treasure of the elder is the future of the young." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried wildflower, the same kind his grandfather used to pick. He laid it at the statue's feet. "I still see them sometimes," Leo whispered, "in the reflections of the windows. They don't have clocks. They just glow." The moral of the story is this: kindness is the only currency that follows the laws of the heart rather